there's a core idea that's very, very perennial philosophy, very much in line with many other kind of spiritual or religious ideas, that the whole world is an illusion. The entire universe is a dream, and it's basically a bad dream. And it's the result of us thinking that we could separate from God, which we can't in the Course in Miracles metaphysics. There is no actual separation. There is no actual fall from grace. There's no actual sin. But because we think we can, we had this tiny mad idea when the Son of God forgot to laugh, is the quote. This tiny mad idea that you could separate from love. And then when we had this idea, we took it seriously. And I don't even know who the we is here, because that presumes a separation that there isn't. And then we're like, oh shit, I'm afraid that God's going to punish me for having separated, for having like usurped his throne. And I'm guilty for having like done something bad. I'm fearing punishment for the sin in the present, the fears of the future, of the past badness. And so in order to hide from this terrible mistake I made, this terrible sin, I'm going to project an entire universe out there. And I'm going to keep projecting separation after separation after separation. So you have the Big Bang, which all the forces are one big oneness. And then there's now, an electroweak force, and then the weak and the strong nuclear. There's just this continual separation and separation and separation of further and further differences and distinctions and less seeming oneness. And this is like in my, crazy mind going to help me hide from God's punishment. But in the Course in Miracles view, this is all a mistake. This is all just a silly mistake. You can't actually separate from God. So it's all something we're made up, and that's what true forgiveness is. Forgiveness is seeing that you can't do anything wrong. The end is certain. You're already enlightened. So is everyone else. You can't hurt each other. You can't hurt yourself. And so, like, at the end of the day, that's like what the Course is always saying. So the full awakening is essentially the disappearance of the universe. The entire world of manifestation is just this kind of bad dream.
Today's episode is with Jordan Myska Allen. Jordan is founder and CEO of the Relateful Company, an organization that works to build inner peace and interconnection through truth and love. At the core of their approach is a practice called Relatefulness, which emphasizes interpersonal relating, construct awareness, and non-duality. Jordan is also a practicing life coach, is the author of A Beautiful Apocalypse, and is a longtime practitioner of A Course in Miracles. If you enjoyed this content, you can help support it by joining our Patreon or by making a donation down at the link below. And so with that, I'm very happy to introduce this episode with Jordan Myska Allen.
But what's so beautiful about A Course in Miracles is like, this is the fundamental premise that it rests on. And it kind of says that, but it constantly travels back and forth. Also, what's very confusing about it for students like myself is that it constantly is going back and forth between, I would say, the ultimate or that non-dual perspective and the relative perspective. So, it'll say for the relative perspective, for example, fear is the opposite of love, and then it'll go to the non-dual. But what is all-encompassing has no opposite. So just constantly switching back and forth, like, and I find that actually extremely helpful, because it's essentially what our lives are like. We're constantly forgetting the truth, and then it's like, oh yeah, let's come back to it. And so it's basically this very gentle, loving reminder to turn your attention back to truth or reality or God or love or forgiveness. Because it's like, look, yeah, of course you're going to screw it up. Everyone is. That's the nature of reality. You can just keep coming back to it. Just notice that and keep coming back to it. There's a kind of like strange loop here, where if you take the metaphysics seriously, what it means is the metaphysics is not, you can't take it seriously. Like, it's saying this is an illusion. This whole story is a myth. Like, in fact, the Course says over and over again stuff like, words are but symbols of symbols, twice removed from reality. Where the word is obviously a symbol of something, right? If I say dog, it's not the actual dog. This is kind of Ce n'est pas un pipe, that classic, I think it's Magritte painting of a pipe. It's like, hey, this is not a pipe. This is This is ink on a page or whatever. So it's kind of pointing to this constructed nature of where we're symbolizing things. But in the Course's metaphysics, the things that we're symbolizing, like dog, are themselves symbols of the deeper thing, either the separation from God or the unity with God. So at the fundamental base level, when we're talking about the world of form, we're talking about everything in the Course's language. And I think this is incredibly helpful. Whether or not it's right, again, we have the strange loop situation. Let's just, if you put a gun to my head and was like, is it right? I'd be like, yeah, it's right. But at the end of the day, everything is either what they say is like fear or love, and fear is a call for love. So everything is either love or a call for love. And that's where like the metaphysics bottoms out in this incredibly useful way. Because we all, every single day, every single person, you, me, everyone listening to this has gone through some experience, probably every hour, where we either like act out of fear or we respond as if fear is real and not a call for love, right? Like to be able to just slowly but surely reclaim more of those as like, oh yeah, this is actually a chance to love, is a movement into like a crazy good life. It's a movement from hell to heaven, basically, right? Because in hell, it's like, oh, fear. There's something that could be threatened. There's something here. Like, let's say, this morning I've got a 6-week-old at home and a 22-month-old, and my wife, my toddler woke up a little early, woke up crying, and I didn't know why. And that was easy to see as a call for love, right? I'm like, oh, he's scared of something. I think he was like, Grandma. He loves his grandma, and I was like, oh no, he must have had a bad dream where something bad happened with Grandma. And so that's like easy to see as a call for love. But it was really early. My wife didn't sleep enough. And so she snapped at me and I just snapped back. I didn't see it as a call for love. And it took me a second to see my snapping as a call for love and treat myself with love instead of treat myself with judgment. And so that's where like the metaphysics bottoms out as like over and over again throughout your day, throughout every moment, seeing where you're separating and you're seeing basically non-godliness or non-love or non-presence, or if you're more of kind of an emptiness, non-dual guy, it's like where you're believing that in your thoughts, you're believing that yourself is real. You're believing that you exist outside of the you that's separate, that's anything other than just being awareness. In some ways, the Course in Miracles has nothing to say about the metaphysics inside the world of form. Like the Course is kind of like, hey, the world of form, the universe, the everything that we call reality, matter, that's all dream stuff. And what we're here talking about is like all the dynamics of how you convince yourself of the dream stuff being real and how to put a pause to that if you want to. When it comes to, with the exception of like the way the dynamics of the ego and forgiveness and stuff like that, when it comes to like facts about the world of form, it just doesn't say anything because it doesn't need to. It's not its purpose. If you were going to learn to computer program Haskell, I wouldn't say go read A Course in Miracles. I'd say go read a Haskell book. If you want to learn about cosmology, learn about cosmology. Go read physics.
So it's steeped in and comes from the Christian tradition, and so it has a little bit of, it has that flavor in terms of the origin story. So I'm curious if you could speak to, people's present moment experience in order to like entertain or explicate the view of the ACIM metaphysics of that like fundamental guilt, which is a large part of the Christian mythology.
Some of the stuff that really excites me and I love as a nerd that loves relating and psychology and stuff is seeing how much that kind of guilt symbolically comes up in like all of these interactions. And so we basically project it out onto someone or something. Like this morning with my wife, like she snapped at me. I'm a victim of her snapping at me. This is a way basically for me to avoid my guilt. Like at some deep basic level, the Course is saying that like, and I think this is basically right, that like in that moment, I'm like somehow secretly in my being of beings, like aware that I'm separating from her, and that's fake, and I feel guilty about that. You could say that I'm in that moment. I've done the creation story, right? I've separated. I've stepped out of the Garden of Eden in that exact moment. In the moment, forget time
By choosing fear.
by choosing fear, exactly. And then I'm like, oh shit, again, pre-verbally, pre-thought, I'm like, oh shit, I have to get rid of this guilt somehow because I can't stand it. And so then I project it out on her and make her wrong so that I don't have to be wrong. And then I can tell you and everyone else, look, she started it. She snapped at me. Don't you see? I'm justified in my anger at her and my reaction. I'm not the bad guy. Because secretly, I am fucking convinced that I am the bad guy. It's really hard to get to this level. Our deepest spiritual lessons are often the ones where it's almost impossible to see the other person as the good guy or the neutral guy in the situation.
Can you speak more to this flinching? The egoic structure must be organized must be like a very complex organization around like really fundamental flinches about like
Yes,
just existing,
that's
and
it.
then like choosing love or fear, or choosing fear over love.
That's it.
And if you get high enough, say equanimity and whatever, you pay attention closely enough, you can like notice the flinchings.
Yeah, that's
And so
right.
then it disentangles it from like all the narrative. So could you speak more to that?
Yeah, yeah. So let me speak to that on a again like a kind of a take home. Like, what can the listeners take home with them right now?
Yeah.
Level, and then go more into like the philosophy. And if like a take home practice would be like look for what you flinch from as something that you can accept in your identity, and see if you can embrace more of it. So, for example, I had a client the other day that was like, "Oh, I don't want to admit that I'm self-judgmental." And like we've been over the course of a few weeks, he's looking at anger, and it was like, well, you've got a lot of anger towards yourself in the form of self-judgment, and he just couldn't see it. Now he's seeing it, but he doesn't want to admit it. And I'm like, you basically you can expand your identity to include more. Yes, you're a nice guy, you're a sweet guy, everyone likes you. Also, you're self-judgmental. Also, some people don't like you. Also, boom, 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 and like you just slowly but surely expand more and more of who and what you're able to say I am to. And at the end of the day, you end up being I am to everything, and there's no flinching. So I think that's like the take home is like say I am to one more thing that you weren't willing to identify as part of you. Okay, yeah. So I don't know what's the hard ones are like maybe like have you ever heard a critique of me that you can share?
Of
You don't even
you?
have to buy into it. Yeah, you can be like that person's so wrong.
You want me to share a critique of you?
Yeah.
You're Pollyannish.
I'm Pollyanna-ish. Yeah, great. Perfect. This is a good one. So yeah, so if there's any resistance in me to saying yes to that, then it's like that's where the forgiveness work lies. That's I actually feel it in my heart. There's like a tremble in my heart. I don't want to admit that there's something in me that's Pollyanna-ish. And this one's a really cool one because it shows me two turning aways. One, the willingness to be a Pollyanna and be seen as that, and two, whatever the fuck I'm turning away from with the Pollyanna. So I'm like, oh wow, there's some work for me to like expand and include more. I mean, I'm not that reactive, so maybe there's not that much work here. Um, yeah, and that doesn't mean that I'm also not realistic, right? Like you basically just include more in a way. It sounds like it's a paradoxical, but it's kind of like Walt Whitman saying like, do I contradict myself? Yes, I contain multitudes. We're just all of it. So yeah, so what happens is like on deep psychological philosophical level is that turning away, that flinching away from something at the end of the day is flinching away from that feeling of having separated from God. Feeling that we are responsible for not being enlightened. Is another way to say it.
What does it mean to flinch away from God?
I think that you're so smart and capable, and I love that we get to connect. Do you feel any resistance to receiving the truth of that?
Yeah.
That resistance is the flinch away from God. And then on the other side, it's or on another side, let's send out the other side. Let me do mine, especially in relationship to Pollyanna. Like, there's this feeling, there's this immense terror of really looking at the idea that, like, maybe, hmm, yeah, that maybe I actually am responsible for um, not being one with God, and that's the to face that and to feel into that feeling. Like, I feel literally my belly gets kind of royally, and to face that and feel it and stay in, and you'll notice, like, you'll keep flinching, you'll start randomly thinking about something else, or you'll go on talking about some other random bullshit in a podcast instead of staying with that feeling and just being like, ow. And eventually you can do that with God, right? You're like, it's okay because I know, and that's where the Course in Miracles metaphysics is extremely helpful. You're like, that isn't actually true. That feeling of primordial guilt, of original sin, of there's like a psychological way of saying this, like in NARM, the neuroaffective relational model of healing developmental trauma, is the connection trauma. Is this feeling like I don't belong here, I don't deserve to exist in reality. That's the feeling, I think, that you're learning to face and be like, it's okay, I am here, so this is a lie. That I am one with God, and so I can face this feeling fully and embrace it and allow it to be present until I see through it. It looks like the same action to do something that's like playing a part in the world stage, where you're not locked into an individuated identity, you're inhabiting individuated identity, and you're not believing it, you're playing with it. And that's the real invitation, is like, you're not believing it, you're playing with it, and part of what you're playing is the game of forgiveness, of your the world is a classroom rather than a stage, is a better way to say it. And everything that comes across in this classroom is stuff that for me to learn and let go of. And this is really nice because then you also can drop this idea of perfection. Like, this happens a lot with, like, enlightenment, or like kind of non-dual teachings, where, like, you assume that you're going to eventually get there one day, and then it's like it's a real bad setup, because then if you either then inevitably something's going to happen when you get reactive, right? Like, you're gonna, so I don't know, whatever, someone grifts you, and your wife's gonna snap at you, you're gonna the president that you don't like gets elected, the, like, or awful, you see awful things in the news every day, someone gets beheaded, some innocent child gets drowned or shot or whatever. Like, there's just, like, awful things that are happening, and you're going to see that. And then if you think, if you have any sort of reaction at all, you're going to think either I must not be enlightened, and that sucks because you kind of, like, separate from God and, like, leave the garden right then and there, right? Or you have to hide that from yourself because it's going to break your identity of what enlightenment means, or what being woken up means, or something like that. And so in order to maintain the idea of what you think it means to be a non-dual dude, you have to push that experience away instead of saying yes to it and embracing it and allowing it and moving on. So there's a real nice allowance of this kind of infinity of unfolding that I think A Course in Miracles invites us to. I certainly feel it's important, and it's part of what we bring with whatever I'm doing with relatefulness, with uptrust, with all of that. It's like bringing in this kind of allowance of unfinishedness. And another way to say it would be like, you know, an ever perfecting quality, or being is becoming, being is creative.
Can you expand on transcending but including everything, and also this perspective of, like, permanent centerlessness? So
Yeah.
the fact that there is no such thing as a true thought, since thoughts are symbols and refer they don't have the reality that they point to.
Yeah.
At the same time, they can be true when that structure is assumed. And
That's right.
so you can have an ego or be an ego and transcend but include that. And then other levels of identification, like identification as everything or as nothing, or
Right.
beyond everything and nothing, until you can't find yourself anywhere, even between everything and nothing. Could you talk about that? Because it's like something shifts. It's like
Yeah.
the the reactivity is different on the other side, and I'm curious if you could speak to how the reactivity is actually different on the other side.
Yeah. There's some sense of like there everything is okay in a fundamental sense because I realize that this is a dream. But actually what you'll notice if anyone has practiced lucid dreaming is like even though everything's okay, there's kind of like um there's tracks and it takes a shitload of energy to get off the track. And like you can suffer in a dream. Like even when you realize it's a dream, right? Like another way to say it would be when you watch a movie, there's like really good movies and there's some mediocre movies and then there's bad movies. And so yeah, it's all made up, but like there's a sense in which like the more reactive you are, the more mediocre or bad the movie is, and like or the more painful the dream is, and you just don't need that. So it's not a problem. You don't believe in it. You know it's not real, and it's kind of like you might as well rest in deeper peace.
So it's like improving experiencing, even if there is like at the most meta level a piece that is beyond words.
Yeah, that's right. And my sense of the actual experience of pretty much well, my sense is just that there's a sense that like there's a continual kind of set feeling of unfolding into more and more of that. Like it's not a problem, and then you look around and you're like, "Whoa, I've been making so many things a problem, even though I thought they weren't a problem." And there's like another layer that lets go, and you're like kind of like you said, you're like, "Oh, I'm everything. I identify with everything." And then you look and you're like, "Whoa, I'm not actually like everything that I am is actually nothing." And the only reason I knew there was an everything is because I was feeling into the nothing, right? Like if I know that I'm here, like we've talked about, knowing here-ness requires me to know not here. And so I'm like feeling every time I feel here, I feel not here. I'm like, what? And so I'm like, fuck, I'm actually notness. I'm like non-being. And that's what all me and everything is. And then you're like, well, wait, I'm not being. I guess I'm both or neither, or that doesn't make sense. And then the language starts to break down, and then experience is just like happening. And then it seems like it could be that these layers are infinite. There's like an infinite deepening of like, whoa, I thought I knew what was going on. I thought I knew what reality was. But it's so much more. It's so much deeper. It's so much wider. It's so much more. Uh, I even saying more is not right, right? Even saying deeper is not right. It's so much more superficial. And like that's beautiful and good and part of it too. It's so much less, and that's part of it too. Like, right? These you can't and um yeah, so I think there's some kind of like infinite quality to that. It may end. I mean, maybe the disappearance of the universe is the end. Somewhere in A Course in Miracles, they ask this question of like, what is reincarnation so? And I really love the way that the Course answers it. It's really indicative of like how I think to deal with this question of like living, transcending and including the world. The Course's answer is like, if believing in reincarnation helps you find God, believe in it. If it doesn't, don't. Because it's all made up anyway. The question is in the world of form. So any answer that we give is going to basically be fake. So just do whatever it is that helps you move to love and respond to fear with love. That's always the answer. And so that's the question of like how do you transcend and include the world? You always ask what's it for? Like you start to see everything symbolically. And this is fun too, by the way. It sounds like it's not like oh, I've got to like do some deep contemplation of every it's like I watch Marvel movies and I'm like blown away by like the symbolic significance of them. Or one of my favorites that people have heard me talk about before is Babe the Pig or Lego Batman. Like these movies I think are so fucking deep. They're so good. Or like a movie about forgiveness is Encanto. The Disney movie Encanto is like an incredible movie about forgiveness in my mind. So yeah, you start to see what it's really for, and the more you can ask yourself that question, the less things that used to bother you bother you. You're like, oh, what this is really for is for me to believe that I'm a victim of this person or this frame or this organization or whatever. And that's my choice. That's my doing. So I can change it if I want. And I don't have to. There's no pressure to change it. I can keep suffering for as long as I want. And that's genuine. That's not like a fake, "So obviously you should change." No, like you can only handle so much at a time. And sometimes you realize more than you can take on. And you're like, I'm gonna set this one aside for now. I'm gonna deal with one thing at a time. And that's okay. Because it's all an illusion anyway.
What is the opening quote of A Course in Miracles, and how does it fit in here?
Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Yeah, so this is again where it's constantly moving back and forth between the layers of the absolute and the relative, which obviously is a dualistic framing, but nevertheless, um, nothing real can be threatened. That's the absolute. There is no universe. There's sorry, nothing real can be threatened is like is the opposite. It's working with you as saying like, look, you think that things can be threatened that you care about, but they can't because they're not real. Nothing unreal exists, like because actually all there is God, and that's the peace of God that you can step into. So it's kind of it's shocking though, because what it means is not just that you don't exist; everything you care about doesn't exist. And it's just like it's a real humdinger. I don't know why that's the phrase that came to mind. It's really tough to admit, like, man, it's almost a sense that like God doesn't care about me because there's no me and there's no world to be cared about.
What does it mean that there's no me or there's no world? What does it mean to say that the world's an illusion?
What it means is that you're never upset for the reason you think. So if you think you're upset because you lost a job or because your boss was mean to you or because the economy was tanking and the Fed should have done something different with the rates, or somebody hacked your crypto exchange and you lost all your money or whatever. Not that that happened to me like a bunch of times. You think that's all buying into these frames of like of injustice, which are based on thoughts of separation, which themselves are kind of dubious upon inspection. And A Course in Miracles is not like it's offering you this frame, and same here, me, I'm offering you these things to try on, but in no way am I saying this is something you have to take it as fact. Like these are symbols too, right? So the real deal is to like find the symbols that help you find more love in the truest, wholest, freest, emptiest sense of the word. And what that means for me is like looking in the moment, like, oh yeah, when I'm upset, when I'm angry, when I'm sad, when I'm happy, when I'm ecstatic, when I'm turned on, when I'm like craving, when I'm rejecting. It's just like looking at what's really going on, and at a fundamental level, I'm creating all of this stuff through meaning making, which is just completely unnecessary. And when I look actually in the moment, I'm like, man, being is. Awareness is, I am, I can feel that, I know that. Everything else is made up. Even when it's real, even when I'm like, okay, this is a body, like that's a made up distinction, because what this actually is like skin and like organs, and what that actually is bacteria and like gut biomes, and what that actually, it's like it's there's a construct choice at every time we make any sort of designation. We're choosing a construct, right? And you can see this so obviously. Again, I've been watching my child acquire language over the past year, and it's beautiful and amazing. It always like twists my mind the way he uses language. It's like, oh, that is a good way to use it. For example, one silly stupid example is like last night, he was like, close the bed, no, close the blanket, and because he wanted the blanket on top of him, and it was like, that is a kind of closing. That's creative. He did that too with my hand. He wanted my hand on him. He's like, close your hand. And I'm like, of course, that's a great way to say it. I never thought of it that way. And so it's like he's making these distinctions, which are not real distinctions. I'm like, obviously, I'm not closing the blanket the same way I close a door. And yet, it's a perfectly fine distinction. It's true of us. We're not actually singular bodies. That humans can't exist in isolation. We're overlapping networks of communities. We're sharing gut biomes. We're like the products of, like, I had coffee this morning. God knows how many people were involved in getting that coffee from like the bean in the ground that grew the plant to like my lips, and the water I use, and this, there's just like this crazy level of interdependence of what I actually am to even do something so simple as drink coffee. It's like it's so silly in some ways that I think I'm an I. And yeah, of course, I walk through the day. I need to take care of myself. We need to have good boundaries in order to allow that love to flow. But nevertheless, like, what happens is, the more I can see the illusion of that, of the fiction of those boundaries, of those constructions, I'm actually more free to hold them lovingly and lightly, and play with them. There's an attitude of lightheartedness or playfulness that comes from it. A good example of this is, there's this famous quote that I think is often misunderstood, where anger is never justified, from A Course in Miracles. And the misunderstanding that I think I see people do is like, oh, therefore I shouldn't be angry. But that's not what the Course is saying. There's no shoulds in a world of form. There's just, is it moving you closer to love or further from love? And then it's your choice. You're the decision maker that gets to decide whether you want to choose a miracle. The miracle here is forgiveness, by the way. It's the shift in perception from individual or separated or sinful or guilty to innocent, connected, joined, one with God. So that's the miracle that this is a course in, is shifting perception. It's seeing oneness. So what I was forgot to finish with anger is the yes and, the transcend and include, is it's anger is not justified, but neither does that mean it's unjustified. Like, it simply is. So is any emotion. So is anything. Like, see it for what it is. And from this view, no eyes, no ears, no mind. It's no anger. Like, what it is a way of not of flinching, of turning away. But that's okay. It's not justified because nothing is justified, and that's okay. So you learn to embrace it and say yes, that, and much more. And as the more you do that, I find, I again, this is true of the thousands of students that have come through my programs, basically, or my community, is that the more people are, there's obviously ways to do this wrong. You can indulge too much, you can spiritually bypass on another side, but like, on the whole, when people are able to embrace more and just say like it's okay, and allow themselves to be more whole, truly whole, to like not flinch away from the hard stuff. Ironically, this is very non-Pollyanna-ish. There's my defensiveness probably, but also wanting to be seen, you know.
So every time we resist something is an act of choosing fear over love. And choosing fear over love means that we get to be a victim or an individual self. And what's so good about that?
From the perspective of the victim or the individual self, what's good about it is that you get to keep hiding from guilt
And that's guilt over.
over absolutely everything, basically. Like, both on a literal sense of like a bunch of like little things that you did, like maybe you didn't give
Yeah.
the homeless guy change and you felt bad about it, and so you, instead of facing that guilt and dealing with it and allowing it, breathing through it, you're like, fucking homeless people, or you're like fucking corporate pigs that make it, or in Austin, fucking Californians that moved here and made the housing so expensive. You just find anywhere else to put that blame on other than yourself. And what's so that's a great question. What's so appealing about this? I should ask myself that, like when I was snapping, like because probably most of your listeners have felt like at some point this moment where they're aware, but they're still kind of doing the bad habit.
I'm curious how letting go and surrender fits in.
Mm,
So we talked a lot about yes anding, which is transcending but including
right.
uh, everything. And
Quick pause on that. I want to note that yes and is isomorphic to no but. And I think this is important because I think a lot of people in spiritual circles think they've got to say yes and that somehow no is bad, and it's just the exact same. Yes, and right. Uh can we go to get pizza? Yes, and I hope we get veggies on the pizza or something. It's pretty much the exact same thing. You can say no, but can we get pizza? No, but I definitely want you to be happy. Maybe we can get pizza tomorrow. They're actually equivalent, and I want people to have access to both because I think it's just super important to be free to say no.
so we can no but or we can yes and there's also this perspective that an abiding awakening requires giving up everything, like the end of attachment.
Yeah,
Because if you believe like I need X in order to feel Y, Z, J, H feelings or whatever, then as long as that isn't seen through or let go of or yes anded or but node or no butted, it's still maintaining the fundamental problem of what you really want being conditional and outside of yourself and not a part of what you really are. So how does like this spiritual teaching on surrendering everything fit into the transcending but including of an egoic structure, which sometimes indulges and has tons of wacky and contradictory preferences and values and wantings?
yeah, yeah. These are such good questions. I love it. I want to go in two directions, and maybe we'll go in both of them. And one is like the key is a key thing is just always asking like, what's this for? What's this symbolize? Is this for fear? Or is this for love? Or is this, is this a call for love or is this love? What's this for? Is this for reifying a body? Is this for making me believe that like I'm a victim? Or is this for helping me join? Is this for forgiveness? Is this for seeing the truth of the way things are? So the key is it's from the Course in Miracles point of view, and again, I really stand by this. Is it's almost never about the form. One good example of this is like healing, taking medicine, taking any kind of medicine, ibuprofen or Wellbutrin or whatever. It doesn't matter. Cancer medicine. It's like a lot of spiritual types are like, oh, you shouldn't take medicine, because it's not natural and it's not of God or whatever. And the Course in Miracles point of view is like, yeah, medicine is magic, but literally so is everything else. Breathing is magic. Existing is magic. It's not real. So the point is not whether you should take medicine or not take medicine or do a natural treatment or a Western therapeutic treatment. The point is, where are you coming from? And what's it going to do for you? If you don't take medicine, is that going to bring you more fear? Then take medicine. Is taking medicine going to bring you more fear? Then don't take medicine. It's all from the Course in Miracles point of view. Healing is a choice that you make that isn't about the form. It's not about whether you have the cancer or not, or whether you get if the headache goes away or not. It's about the choice to see reality as for what it is, to see oneness, to see wholeness, to include that as part of who you are. the unhealed mind is the one that sees everything as separate and distinct and deserving of judgment or hiding or attack or whatever. So, okay, so that's one direction. And since you're pausing, I'll keep going. And the other direction is about surrender. And surrender is a tricky word, I think. It's so true and it's so useful, and it's been a huge part of my spiritual path is surrendering, practicing surrender. Um, I even led a practice that we named with surrender for a long time, but it's tricky because just like anything, you can hide. There's a lot that can hide in surrender. There's a lot of ego that can hide in surrender. Like, well, I'm just following my impulse, my intuition. Like, like my surrender is telling me that I need to sleep with this student, even though I'm a teacher. Like, and it's, that's just what my surrender is telling me. So I got to do it. It's not me. It's not my fault. It's blame it on God, for example. Like I haven't actually seen that myself, but I've heard of that. And I've seen something close. I've seen a teacher do that with kissing a student in a workshop. With that exact justification. And so there's something, maybe I'm crazy and maybe that was the best thing for that workshop. And that, there's certainly a world where that's true, but it's just a very, very tricky place because it's so easy to like smuggle in these egoic desires and be like, well, I'm just surrendering to what's here now. So I think there's some real, like the spiritual community needs a rehabilitation of the word.
With the frame that egoic desires are based in fear, are all egoic desires based in fear, or what do they become when they're are they transmuted when they become transcended but included?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I think probably everyone has had this experience of like an impulse towards something that they felt a kind of intuitive yes to, that that they didn't know why or what it was going to get them, or it was just maybe it was an intuitive yes to help somebody, to pick someone up off the ground, or an intuitive yes to, for me, like when I finished my novel, I had this weird yes to going to Europe to a wedding that I was invited to. And it was like a very catalytic time in my development. It was important for me, and where I finished the book and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, there's always these moments, and you basically, when you start to pay attention, I think everyone has had these where you're like this kind of intuitive impulse towards something that's non-rational. And basically I think you can just run experiments and like you start to lean into that and surrender into that, and you'll notice that like the ones that lead you towards goodness in the world, towards more goodness, more of what, even as just as you define it. And it's like you start to kind of discern internally when those impulses come from the Holy Spirit, to use the Course in Miracles language, or when they come from like the ego. And in A Course in Miracles, they say the ego always speaks first. And it's a helpful reminder to slow down, right? Like, what should I do? Whatever comes right away, wait. Because the ego always speaks first. I don't know if that's like you should make that into like a rule that you tattoo on your forehead or whatever. Maybe sometimes the thing that comes first is like the right thing to do. It's just, but it's a reminder to kind of chill out, slow down, tune in, and remember that you're much bigger than that desire and that ego. And and ask, what's it for? What's it doing for me? What's it going to do for life? Is it towards love? Is it towards fear? Is it from love? Is it from fear?
What is forgiveness, and how does it relate to the fundamental choice between love and fear?
Yeah. Yeah. Forgiveness is seeing that that there is no way to harm anyone or anything. So normally people think of it as like, let's say
10,000 egos are screaming,
I know.
having heard you say that.
I know. It sucks. I know. I thought about this actually. I really did. I thought about it this morning when I was thinking about this interview. I was like, oh geez, like I can
Yeah,
think
plus
of,
there was the whole he thing earlier about God being a he. But
yeah. Well, yeah, because again, from this point of view, it's all just symbols, right? So it doesn't actually matter. We could say she, we could say they. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter if we pick one or the other either. So it equally doesn't matter. And this makes sense. You can imagine, like, we're in an epoch where people have a sense of we're reclaiming a lot of things that we need to reclaim in the world of form. We're including more in our holistic embrace of who we call we. I think this is healthy and good. And so, of course, there's kind of railing against, like, oh my God, like another he situation. But you can imagine in 500 years, hopefully much, much sooner, right? If we're successful in our feminism, like, um, no one will care about pronouns because there won't be any discrimination. And it won't matter whether the Course in Miracles said he or she or anything like that. And I respect that as a text, as the God, who knows what it's, maybe it'll still be around in 500 years, and so that's why it's that way. For me, I expect my writing probably won't be around in 500 years, so I'm very cognizant of the people reading it now, and I often, I'll think about, like, if I give an example of a manager in a my three things email, I'll often choose she as the manager to, like, rewrite the automatic conditioning around, like, oh, a manager must be a he. So I personally think there's a place for this, but all of this has nothing. This is all in the world of form, right? This is and what it's symbolizing is a way for me to love. Like, the social justice people are asking for love. They're calling for love. Great, let's love them. If somebody asks me to use a different pronoun, they're asking me to love them, and they've told me exactly how I can love them. Why wouldn't I do that? I'm like, it's really hard for me to imagine arguments against. I want to be more conscious with my language anyway. So there's a lot of these things where I'm like, on a personal level, I'm like, the choice is never about the form. It's about, like, what is it really? They're asking me to love them and telling me how. I could probably just do that. Now, if they're asking me to love them by, like, saying, well, Trump is evil, I don't think I can do that. I'm going to find some other way to love them. And for me, what I usually do is look for the truth behind that. I'm like, God, there's some really awful stuff that he's done, or something. I don't know. I can't do it in the moment right now. It has to be real or something. But, like, I find some way of validating their pain and then loving them, because it's never about, they're never upset for the reason that they're saying. So I just want to honor it, validate it, and then go to the real thing. Like, dude, you're hurting. I get that. I'm hurting. We're all hurting. See if we can love that. We're hurting. Let's see if we love it. We're hurting because the world is fucked, right? Like, we made a really good hiding spot. The ego here made it really easy to see victims and oppressors everywhere. That the 10,000 egos that are reacting to my comment, that'll be great if 10,000 people listen to this, but, like, that are reacting to my comment are, of course they feel justified in reacting, because you can look and you can see massive amounts of suffering everywhere you turn your eye. It's a very good place to project. There's a lot of really good targets.
How is that a projection?
It depends on what the person is saying and how they're saying it. In my world, it's what's the purpose? What's it here for? So what I find is that, like, so if you're like, man, there are people being murdered in Ukraine in this war with Russia, like, I don't know if that's a projection or not. I mean, I guess in the Course in Miracles Metaphysics, it's a projection, because anything that's not God is a projection. And anything that has this kind of, like, separative quality is a projection rather than a joining quality, which is an extension. But I think these are technicalities that aren't important. Like, more importantly, like, usually what happens is someone saying that has an opinion and they have feelings and they're hurting. And they're projecting something out. They're like, Putin is a fucking asshole or whatever. They're not empathizing. They're not saying, wow, what a poor, like, I can do it. I don't know. I don't know the Putin story very well. I don't know a lot. I don't keep up with a lot of, like, this kind of stuff. But, like, this might turn some heads, unfortunately. But, like, say Trump, for example. Like, I look at Trump and I look at a guy that's in massive suffering. He does not look like he's happy. He looks like he gets inflamed at every random tweet that, says something negative about him. What a sad way to live. I have compassion for him. It doesn't mean I endorse what he does or the way he talks or, all these things that I just disagree with. But I can certainly understand where he's coming from. I can understand that I can have compassion for him is all I'm saying. And it's another way of saying I can have compassion for myself when I'm that guy. Because we've all been Trump. We've all been reactive at dumb things. We've all said untrue things. We've all said things that hurt people. We've all said things in order to get votes, to get likes. We've all promoted our friends that didn't deserve it. There's every last corrupt thing you can think of that Trump or any other politician on either side, Biden, whoever, has done. Like, we've all done it in some form or fashion. Maybe in some really small way. Maybe not as bad. Maybe not as many people died. Maybe not as many people got hurt. From the Course in Miracles point of view, there's no order of difficulty in miracles. It's all illusion. So it's seeing what it really is. And so there's a sense where we're all one. When I forgive Trump, I forgive myself. When I forgive myself, I forgive Trump. Same with Putin, same with Ukraine, same with all these bad things happening out there. And then a key factor here is that, like, I think people misunderstand A Course in Miracles often because it doesn't deal with the world of form. And I don't think it should. I'm glad it doesn't. They just assume that therefore they shouldn't do anything. I guess we won't go vote. I guess we won't have political parties. I guess we won't stop Joseph Kony and his child soldiers. Like, that the Course never says anything about what you should do in the world, ever. And neither do I want to. Like, really, truly. Like, I want to invite people into truth, into honesty, into facing reality and the journey that takes them on, into their gut sense of what's best and finding out how to do that in the truth or reality of interconnectivity. And what that looks like is going to be so different the Bhagavad Gita does this beautifully. It shows Arjuna on the battlefield being like, holy shit, do I really have to fucking fight my brother in this war? That's the deal. Maybe you have to fight your brother, but you do it with that. That's the real surrender. It's like, you do it with love. I think in the Bhagavad Gita, it's, is it Krishna that's like, dude, you think these lives are yours? They were mine all along. Like, why do you think you're in charge of who lives or dies? And so Arjuna gets kind of called into account for his arrogance in a certain way. And it's the same thing for us. Like, if you're called to bring more awareness around an issue, or go, like, I have one of my best buddies works for the UNHCR, the High Council for Refugees. And he's an amazing human being. I love him so much. That's his calling. Like, he's not really even a kind of social justice person in the traditional sense. It's just like, that's where he keeps getting drawn. That's where he finds aliveness, and it fits, it works, and he's good at it. And it's beautiful. And like, that's, of course, the Course is, and no spiritual practice should say anything about this because it's so unique for each individual. The Course is not going to be like, Lucas, you need to start a podcast. You need to name it you. Yeah. So there's plenty of room to be active. And when you clear out all those judgments, when you find that deeper surrender, you find you can enter into that battle with love, with open arms, and it stops looking like a battle. It stops feeling like a battle. And actually, a really good example of this I want to throw out there is the Great Springs Project. It's in Austin. There's a group. Actually, it's in Texas, Central Texas. San Antonio, I'm in Texas, I'm in Austin. And San Antonio to Austin is about a little over 100 miles. And there's a bunch of trails and a bunch of springs. And their goal, this Great Springs Project, is to connect into one super trail of 100 miles from Austin to San Antonio that protects the watershed and the 4 major springs along that watershed. And it is an amazing project. And I know the people that are in charge, and at least one of them is basically a spiritual teacher, a Sufi. And she's just an amazing, amazing human being. And you can see the way they run the project is, for example, like they're into what normally would be like a kind of they would often be like anti-capitalist, or these environmental movements are often anti-oil, for example. And this is not what their strategy is. They're like, we're going to work with developers and show them how, like, if they can give us an easement on their land, it's going to make their development worth more and be better for everyone in the long run. And we're going to work with, they have oil salesmen who know about land usage rights and water rights, going out there and talking with the farmers they want to buy property from. So it's this beautiful inclusive embrace of saying, like, we don't need to exclude anyone from this project. We have a thing we want to do, but let's use everything we got to go to the end goal. And that's a kind of more surrendered or enlightened action, I think. And that's what we're aimed at. If ending the war in the Russia, Ukraine, or anywhere from a Great Springs Project mindset. That's just my personal opinion. All of this is, I guess, but I'm not obviously not speaking for A Course in Miracles here.
I'm curious about the forgiveness part, where forgiveness is the perception or realization that no actual harm can be done to anyone.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you could expand upon that, given that suffering appears to be or is very real when we live in fear and separateness and buy into reality as fundamentally real and separate from us. And what the reaction of all of those egos recoiling, including mine, to that definition of forgiveness, what they're reacting to, and
Yeah.
where we go from there.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is because we were just talking about the Great Springs Project, you can think of that nonprofit as having a forgiveness attitude towards the oil people of Texas and to the developers. And it really fits, because the reason why these springs are dying and the reason why, like, we're losing this open environment is because of housing developers, right? In one particular mindset. So you could easily make them into the bad guy, and there's a temptation to do that, right? But that's not the way the Great Springs Project went. They said there's nothing. They didn't do anything wrong. Actually, they did what any person would do, and we can work with them. We can forgive them in the truest sense. So I just wanted to name, like, there's on the ground, the way this looks like is often still towards a goal of goodness, of betterness. And I think a lot of people react because they think that when I say forgiveness means no one can really be harmed, that I'm kind of like countenancing awfulness. They're saying that it's okay for there to be a Holocaust, or that it's okay for any of these things. And I'm just not saying any of that. I'm trying to speak to a different level of relating to how the world is and how it works. And nor am I saying that you should bypass reality. Like, bypassing suffering actually acts as if there's something wrong, right? Like, if you think you like that,
Yeah, I like that one.
yeah, yeah. So, like, if I truly don't think there's anything wrong, there's no, like, if I'm truly forgiving, I can look upon suffering and my heart fucking breaks and I'm in tears, because I'm like, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that either, right? Like, I don't need to bypass my human, oh my God, like, my empathy, my, like, wow, like, and it's almost even more tragic. Like, they don't need whatever's making them do that and do that hurting on other people. Like, they don't need to be doing that. There's a better way. And then I'm faced with my limitations and my finitude as a thing that I think I am, and that I can't save anyone else. And then I'm crying because of that too. I'm feeling my
Yeah.
lack of control.
Yeah, it's because there's the yes anding includes the relative level of human suffering. So, like,
Yeah.
if you lose someone, for example, to someone else's violence,
Yeah.
then you can have both the maybe pain and suffering at the relative human level of the loss, as well as the meta level forgiveness. at the
Yeah.
other level, and then transcend and include everything.
Yeah, it reminds me, Buddhist scholars will remember this story. I can't remember who it was, but there's some famous, enlightened Buddha that I learned about in college, that there's a story about like him losing his wife and his kids and him crying and like being just distraught and in grief. And his students were like, I thought it was all Maya, or whatever the Buddhist word was for whatever sect they were a part of. And he was like, yeah, it is. But fucking sad. There's no resistance. There's no resistance to any of it. Yeah. And there eventually, or somewhere along the way, there's got to be no resistance to resistance. There's got to be a self-forgiveness, an allowance of like, it's okay to have preferences and to be upset about things, and you just want to work on it. You want to see it for what it is.
There are many words that we use that I think actually mean exactly the same thing. Like resistance at bottom is fear,
Yeah, exactly.
and flinching is also a form of fear.
So then your head is turning when I say like forgiveness is seeing that there wasn't actually any harm done. If you're flinching because of fear. Oh shit. What does he mean? Is he saying it's okay to do bad things? Right? Or tell me what's it like in you? Is it fear?
Oh, what happened for me was I was like, yes, it's okay to do bad things, and it's also really important that you not do bad things because that would create a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah, totally.
Which is that perspective.
Yeah.
The yes is accepting that that's what forgiveness is, and at the relative human level, in order to help people not be sad, it's good not to do evil things.
Right, exactly. Because one thing is because there are no other people. So if you're creating pain and suffering, you're creating it for yourself. Why would you do bad things when you recognize it's all one? It doesn't make any sense. Why would you hurt yourself? So that's a big piece of it. But also there's a beautiful line where at the very beginning, the Course in Miracles talks about free will, and from the Course's view, as we've been talking about, it's the end is certain. You're already one with God. You can't ever fuck that up. You're gonna wake up one way or another, and all free will means is that you can take a really long time. You can resist for a really long time. So it's just a choice of when. And so all the courses, all that we're talking about, it's all about just speeding up the awakening. And it's not a big deal. You don't have to speed it up because it's all an illusion. You're going to wake up from the dream. But if you want to speed it up, here's some handy shit.
But this also reminds me of the Diamond Sutra. I want to find this quote because it reminds me so much of this part. Yeah, it goes, all living beings will eventually be led by me to the final nirvana, the final ending of the cycle of birth and death. And when this unfathomable infinite number of living beings have all been liberated, in truth, not even a single being has actually been liberated. Why Subhuti? Because if a disciple still clings to the arbitrary illusions of form and phenomena, such as an ego, a personality, a self, a separate person, or a universal self existing eternally, then that person is not an authentic disciple.
That's it. And one thing that I think is beautiful about that, it reminds me of the classic John 3:16, actually, it reminds me of some other passage where Jesus says something like, "For no one enters the kingdom of heaven except through me," or something. And it's that same thing. Like Subhuti says, "Me," like are going to be led through me. And it's the mistake that people make from separation is to see those characters as different, instead of to see the me as the claiming of the I am of the whole.
Yeah, when the Buddha's saying we'll be led by me to the final nirvana, he's not talking about the Buddha.
Right.
He's talking about like a transpersonal.
He's talking about the claiming of the me. Like
Yeah.
each of us saying me. Our true me. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's funny in Christianity, I think this is it's funny that people forget this because it's like Jesus says this kind of stuff over and over again. He's like to his disciples, he's like, "Why do you call me good?" You know, someone's like Rabbi, which is like good teacher or something like that. And he's like, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone." Or he'll say stuff like, you know, it's not by me but through my Father are these works done. Like even as he's saying, like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You know, he's saying, but it's a different I, because whenever it's like it's the same kind of back and forth of the relative and the absolute.
What's remarkable for me is just like continually seeing how these traditions are actually definitely pointing at the exact same thing. Which
It's
is
very
very
validating.
different than the 19 or 20-year-old version of my philosophy of religion.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
you
my
were.
attitude towards it.
What
Yeah,
were
I
you
just
like
thought
then?
they were just like mutually exclusive and like yeah, I used to just be like they're saying different things
Yeah,
basically.
there is a relative truth to that. Like where for a lot of people, if they don't pick, they don't grow very deep. They, you know, it's like that classic: you dig a bunch of shallow holes instead of one deep one. Oh, all these holes, all these paths are going to lead up to the same peak. So I'll try to take all of them at once. And it's like you can do that, but like you're probably better off if you just pick one, and stick with it. Even though they are, I think you're exactly right that they all are saying the same thing. And my take is that you shouldn't just pick one. Like that's a little too flippant. Like or do whatever you want. Like the flippantness and the playfulness and lightheartedness, obviously, I think is great. But I'm saying more like you're I think what people really are best suited to do is look for what works for them that fits like their unique calling, their unique culture, their unique time period. And this is why I think it's worth like us doing this conversation, even though everything's been said before. Like everyone who's listening could have just gone and read A Course in Miracles or read A Disappearance of the Universe. But it's helpful sometimes to hear people who use, you know, the vernacular of 2023 or like, you know, you and I have gone through different experiences that we can share. And so it's just helpful to see other people who are kind of like lighting up the path. I find it helpful no matter where anyone is on the path. Like maybe, you know, maybe the path is more like a labyrinth where it seems like you're getting close and then it seems like you're getting further away and you're actually moving closer every time. But it turns out then even someone who's just starting on the path is illuminating a section of the labyrinth that I need to see.
Tell me about the gateless gate.
Mm, say more. I actually that phrase came into my mind this morning as I was imagining this, but I want to, yeah.
You're talking about a path to get somewhere that's already imminent. So yeah, the gateless gate came up for me, which is, you know, a totally different tradition, but I think also just again talking about the exact same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so all these frames are dualistic, but they still kind of help. Um, there's these kind of perspective shifts that I think really help us see these things. Like one is you could pick like an object in your house, like a painting, for example, and you can think of it as like you're a coherent consciousness that has like a story of, you know, past and present and future. And sometimes this painting enters into your consciousness and sometimes it leaves your consciousness. But I think you can also kind of take the point of view of the painting and be like, as a painting, sometimes I'm known by different consciousnesses. I'm self-aware. And there's a kind of flip, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, actually right now this painting is not known as Jordan and Lucas. It's like, sorry, it's not like Jordan and Lucas have a painting arise in their awareness. It's more like the painting self knows as awareness now. And it kind of flips it, right? You're like, oh yeah, that is true, even though it's a little different. this is a pastiche. I'm gonna do another one of these. Like another version is like we often think of another one I like to talk to people about is like we often think of ourselves again as like coming into a relationship as like, okay, you woke up in New York and I woke up in Austin, and then we had our days separately, and then we came together, and now we have this podcast recording. And this is fine. This is totally accurate of a certain perspective. Just like it's true that the painting comes into my awareness as it, but it's like equally accurate, I think, to say that like we're products of each other, and not just an anticipation of the recording that where we both influencing each other, but like just like right now, the being that I am um, is kind of a creation of the moment and of our interaction. So I often bring in the image of a tunnel where instead of being a person that builds a bridge from me to you, it's more like what actually is a tunnel between us. And what I am is the empty end of this tunnel, and you're the empty end of that tunnel. Sorry, of that entrance. So you're an entrance and I'm an exit, let's say, or vice versa. So what I am is negative space. I'm the product or the result of our interacting rather than the cause. And you might be able to feel this almost as a meditation. You can imagine it. Anyone listening can imagine that they're in relationship with me or with you or both of us. And they can see this kind of, oh, wow, I'm actually the result of that connection rather than the cause of it. It's just like a little flip, an awareness flip, right? So I think the journey is like another, it's a metaphor or a way of slicing an infinite, unbounded experience that works. The thing I want to encourage people to do is that I think a lot of people hear this stuff and it sounds fucking mystical and weird and amazing. Like, oh yeah, emptiness penetrating form and blah, blah, blah. And like, it's like, wow, those guys are so deep and so amazing. And people use this to like sell programs and like blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm instead like, okay, look, if you can set aside the thought for a second or the worry about like, well, isn't this making non-duality dual if I put language around it, like whatever, like set that aside for a second. Maybe I think it's coming from the question itself is coming from a place of separation, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Set it aside and start to do it, and you'll notice that your descriptions sound a lot like spiritual teachers. Like you'll be like, holy shit, like I've done, and the reason I know this because I've done this with like hundreds of people where I would have people coming to my Monday night session that have never done any relatefulness practice and never even done much meditation. And I basically give them this prompt, and we'd sit in a circle and be like, as a warm up, like, okay, so what's the container of stuff like? And if you notice you're describing stuff, just pause, like stop and just describe the container. And people just from their in the moment experience will come up with like beautiful, like they'll be like, well, I guess it kind of feels like nothing hanging in empty space. And I'm like, yeah, that. They're like, or someone else is like, oh, for me, it's more like almost like love that's everywhere, but also it's like not in anything. It's just there, but I guess it's nowhere too.
It's definitely nowhere.
Right? There you go. So keep going. What do you notice? We'll go back and forth for a second.
All right. It's like perfectly still.
Right. And it's crazy. It's like there is stillness in movement.
It doesn't have any dimension. It's dimensionless.
Right. There's like a flattening of perception that includes space and movement or dimensionality.
It feels static, like it doesn't come or go.
Right. Yeah, there's a kind of ever here quality of like timelessness almost.
Like you couldn't destroy
also.
it.
No. Right. So we're just kind of noticing and describing it, and we sound like in a mystical state because we entered the gateless gate, and that's there for everyone and anyone who wants to try it. And you'll notice, like even if you take a journal and are doing it with yourself, like, and you look at what you've written, it'll probably look like, especially if you can don't worry too much about ideas or things you've read, but more like just noticing in the moment, what's it like that, yeah, you'll be like, wow, man, there's something, feels so good to be human. Like, to be unapologetically like, I I don't know, like I like sex, and like laughter is wonderful, and like I can't stand it when my children suffer. And of course I can. It's fine. Everything's fine, and I know that, and there's beauty, and I can see how that like this their suffering is going to shape them into like deeper, more soulful humans, and all of that. But like just being in the moment of fully feeling, I don't want to step outside of that. I want to step in it. I want to be in it and beyond it. I think this is just a fuller, wholer, more. I feel it as being more honest in me.
What is your, say, feelings or thoughts now about A Course in Miracles, given our conversation today? So how would you summarize it, or what is the takeaway, or what's really important here?
I feel like if there's one takeaway, it's something about like gentleness, like mostly self gentleness and self kindness. Like spiritual seekers and philosophers and probably everyone that's interested in this listening, that we're very harsh with ourselves. Often we're very judgmental. We're like, oh, I should be more enlightened. I should be able to talk like John Wheeler, or I should have remembered to do my meditation last night, or and none of that is to like say that like I love discipline. I've been extremely disciplined about my meditative practice for most of my life, since I was 17 basically. And there's a place for that. But it's like discipline can come from compassion. And I really want to encourage people to be kind with themselves and with each other. It also fails gracefully. Like, if you got something wrong on the spiritual path, or if it turns out there is no God, or A Course in Miracles is wrong, like, you were kind. That bit is like, it's just such a deep honoring of the ego, or that big yes and, like there's another quote from where Jesus in the Course says something like, I will honor your miscreations, but I will not uphold them unless they're true. This also is a good definition of forgiveness. Like, the ego is a miscreation, and we're not going to fight it because there's nothing to fight. There's no threat. But we're not going to uphold them or like feed into them either. And they're actually one, right? Because to not honor it or to fight it would be to uphold it. So it's the same for me, it's the same for all of us, and it's the same for like how we treat others, of just like, okay, like we all we all act in crazy fearful ways, and it's like, cool, we can honor that you're afraid, and we can honor your choice to not be enlightened for however long you want. But we're not going to feed it. We're not going to maintain it. We're not going to uphold it. And a lot of that is like, the hard part, like in my relationships, let's say in my marriage, for example, like this morning, the challenge for me was to not react to the reactivity. It's like, in the video game of my life, I didn't beat that boss this morning. And so I'm going to have to face that boss again. And that's great, because I know when I don't react to the reactivity, that's me saying, I'll honor that you're afraid, and I'm not going to uphold it. I'm not going to react to it. I'm going to stay in my centerless center. I'm going to stay in love. And I've done that so many times. I've done that with so many relationships. I've done it with myself, and I've failed so many times. I know what it's like on both sides, and I want to stay in it. And so I'm just kind of gently allowing that. Oops, I kind of had an oops this morning, and okay, let me, and I don't need to push myself. Like, maybe there's an apology I have to make, if I wasn't ready to make it, I wasn't ready to make it right afterwards, and I am now. So I'll go make it. It's a way of just kind of, it's a way of practicing forgiveness for all of us. We didn't do anything wrong. Oh, there's something, yeah, like, I think, again, most people have had this experience as well of like, maybe you have a friend that like is really cool with you and kind of like sucks when they're around other people, or you've seen that with a child. They behave one way with like one person and another with another. And so you can kind of see that, or you even see that with like with enlightened teachers, like their students show up more enlightened when the teacher's around. There's something about that, like from the first person point of view, you start to notice more enlightenment around you everywhere. And then people show up more enlightened. It's beautiful. Like if that's another way to talk about forgiveness. Like the more you come with that heart of love towards whatever's coming towards you, you're going to see more love coming towards you. And yeah, there's a kind of allowance of gentleness, of process, because it's okay, because the end is certain and outside of this time thing anyway. Feel a very nice presence. One more takeaway people can have if they want. I can give infinite, but like we in the relatefulness practice, we do a lot of kind of noticing and naming what's here now. Like I notice my belly. I notice I'm afraid. You don't have to say I notice, but that's just an easy way to distinguish it. And a lot of times, and that's beautiful, and it brings a whole new verve and aliveness to things, to be able to speak relationally to what's presence. But what people forget is they can also speak about awareness and about presence and about what they notice about being present, and bring that into conversation and into relationship. I think this is really an exciting place where we can all kind of help each other relax into well-being even more. Like when naming what it's like, what it feels like. Well, oh yeah, I feel wonderful presence as you speak, or I feel stillness. Like these kinds of things. Like there's a kind of maybe it's just mirror neurons, but there's a way that we can really, through language, like help each other. It doesn't always have to be language, but it's one very powerful way to do it, of just being in the moment, naming what awareness, what being is like here and now. It doesn't have to be on a page. It doesn't have to be in your journal. Yeah, we can just let it interact. It is anyway.
I want to offer you an open space for any last minute words or thoughts about A Course in Miracles, the choice between love, fear, and flinching, and what we've explored here today.
One thing that's worth mentioning is that, like I mentioned briefly earlier, A Course in Miracles is pretty dense. It's kind of like heady and hard to read for a lot of people. And I want to again validate if that's anyone's experience. There's so many Course in Miracles students who have said that like it fell on them at a bookstore, and they bought it and then picked it up and couldn't read it, and 10 years later picked it up again, and then they were in, and that sort of thing. It's a very common experience. So yeah, if it's not your time, or if it's never your time to be inspired by A Course in Miracles, chill. Like I certainly don't care. A Course in Miracles certainly doesn't care. God doesn't care. So whatevs, like it's totally fine. It may not speak to you, and I just want to really acknowledge that. And it may be hard to get it to speak to you, even if you want it to, and that's okay. And yeah, a huge recommendation for Ken Wapnick. He's kind of I think the best teacher that it seems to stay with the heart of the message the most. He's the guy that kind of came in after those two people I mentioned, were the scribe and her business partner Bill. They first showed it to Ken, and he was the one that was like, whoa, like this is the real deal. This is some amazing stuff. And he kind of helped put in chapter headers and organize it, and he's kind of the first teacher, and he died recently. But he just is very, very consistent. He sticks with the message, and he'll be like over and over again, be like, it says the same thing over and over again in 1,000 ways, and I'm saying the same thing over and over again in 1,000 ways. It's very beautiful. So I recommend him. Yeah. If you are going to get into it.
Thank you, Jordan, for coming and hanging out and doing the interview and sharing all this stuff about the problem, not problem, that A Course in Miracles is about.
Yeah. Oh, you're very welcome. Is another thing I love about it is it's very self-aware about this. It's like, yeah, this is just it even says something like, those who seek controversy in this text will find it. Like, I have a right to disagree with myself, and like, if you want to like pick nits, you can do it. I promise. If you want to get the message, you can do that too. So yeah, same deal. Like, it's a joy. It's a real joy. Thank you for having me, and thank you for wanting to focus on A Course in Miracles. It's really cool.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode valuable, you can help support the show by joining us on Patreon, link in the description. There you'll be able to get access to additional benefits that aren't available publicly. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe to this show on YouTube or on your preferred podcasting platform by searching for Mew.